Hello, and welcome back to the Carbon Capture Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Piekarski, and today I am joined by Freya Burton, Chief Sustainability Officer at Lanzatech. Welcome to the podcast, Freya.
Thanks so much, Danielle. It's great to be here.
Yes, we're happy to have you. So why don't we start by having you tell us a bit about yourself and Lanzatech?
Sure. So I've actually been with Lanzatech, which is what we call ourselves a carbon transformation company. And essentially it was started over 15 years ago to find new pathways to make the materials that we use every day, but that come from fossil carbon. And we created Lanzatech to find alternative pathways to make these things. Really what happened was we were looking at, how do we make these things today? And what are the problems that get caused by using carbon once and emitting it into the atmosphere? And we thought, well, alternatives could be plant-based or food-based, but we wanted to avoid that. We wanted to use a feedstock that was abundant, low cost, and actually could be repurposed to a greater good. And so we hit upon using waste carbon as an input for making these products. We're actually originally a team of biologists, but we've since expanded to a much larger group with chemists and engineers and so on. And we harness biology to use waste carbon emissions to make fuels and chemicals. And by doing this, we're not impacting land or biodiversity or the food chain because we're using a waste input. And I've been with Lanzatech since it started. And really this whole industry of carbon transformation or carbon capture has kind of evolved throughout my career here. When I started, people thought we were crazy for what we were trying to do. And today there's podcasts about it, so in magazines and so on. So it's a really exciting industry to be part of.
Very interesting. And I'd seen in the news that recently Lanzatech announced a partnership with Brookfield Renewables. Could you tell us a little more about that partnership?
Absolutely. So this is really exciting because, I think we can all sort of acknowledge that the energy transition is underway. We see it with the rise in solar panels and EVs and wind power. But carbon is a problem that's, it's beyond electricity. It's beyond fuels here. We need carbon in the things we use every day, from like the tires in our bicycles, our clothing, our sneakers, yoga mats, whatever it is, there's carbon everywhere. And where we source this carbon is really key. And what the partnership with Brookfield does, it fast tracks projects to capture and transform that carbon, projects that Lanzatech has developed. We kind of see it as infrastructure funding, which really worked super well for the renewables sector. And it's using that same model for the process industries like Lanzatech's to sort of help this non-power carbon problem. Really what we do is, as Lanzatech, we bring a project, and we call this like a project, we get a project to what we call a final investment decision, FID. And normally these projects would then go to a financial backer. And a financial backer would then have to evaluate it and engage third-party engineers and consultants. And that can add, 9 to 12 months plus onto a project's timeline. But by working with Brookfield, who've committed to investing in projects that Lanzatech is bringing to the table, they've already done this due diligence. They know that we are bringing them projects that they can run with. And so we shorten that timeline considerably. So we look at it as this like really a novel infrastructure fund for the process industry, where Brookfield's really leading the way in getting more steel in the ground, more plants built than would otherwise be possible within a certain time frame.
Wow, that's great. I know when it comes to decarbonization, everything is as soon as possible. So that is really great to hear. What effect will this project have on current carbon markets?
I think today it's really tricky when we look at carbon markets. I don't think there's enough, the price of carbon is still not where it needs to be because we're not taking into account the real externalities of the impact of carbon on our health, on the planet, and so on. But I think what this partnership does, it shows another way to monetize or create value for carbon. It doesn't just have to be a sort of a liability that you have to pay for, and that there's a tracked price that you have to, offset against on your balance sheets if you're an emitter. It can actually be a valuable commodity, it can be a feedstock to make things, and you can add value to it. And by getting more plants built, we're really showing a path to creating that value. And so I think, the effect here is really showing that there are more avenues for carbon than either just sequestering it or just paying a tax on it, or whatever it might be, that there is value that should be spread along the kind of value chain for making these new products, from packaging, from textiles, tires, all of these things that would otherwise come from fossil carbon.
Right. And you kind of touched on what my next question was going to be, which was, what are some of the conversion possibilities with this technology that's being implemented in the partnership?
Yeah, so Lanzatech, we kind of started out looking at fuels, and that was because the technology that we have developed, it's a biological process that makes ethanol by sort of capturing and transforming carbon. Mm-hmm. So ethanol was used as as we know in the US and in other countries, it's used as a road transport fuel blend. So you can lower the carbon footprint of a fuel by adding in ethanol. We also can transform that ethanol through further processing steps into a sustainable aviation fuel. And so this can be dropped in, just like regular jet fuel, mixed with regular jet fuel, and used in jets. We've even had some flights done with Virgin Atlantic and Al Nippon Airways to show this is possible. And I don't know about you, but when you have a new type of fuel, people get a little nervous. But this has gone through a lot of rigorous checks and tests, and even exceeded the expectations of the testing sort of agencies who were looking at it. The other things that we can make beyond fuels are actually, as I mentioned, these things we use every day. I think a lot of people forget that they're positively dripping in carbon. Your clothing, going out for a run in the morning and feeling kind of healthy and at one with the planet. But, your sneakers, the EVA foam that gives you the bounce, that's made from fossil carbon. Your running shorts or your yoga pants or whatever it might be, your sports apparel's generally made from fossil PET. And so we can actually take the ethanol that we make and convert it into those ingredients that make things like polyester, or things that make PET resins for packaging. And we've shown this with collections with Lululemon, with Zara. We've also converted that ethanol into the ingredients that you use to make surfactants. Surfactants are kind of the stuff that makes soap slippy. And this is used in like dish soap. And laundry detergent. And so we've made products with Unilever, for example. So you got this idea that you can clean the skies by capturing the carbon and clean your clothes. It's a kind of fun concept. And then you can use ethanol directly. Ethanol's in things like fragrances. So perfume that you might be wearing. Today, that ethanol generally comes from crop-based or plant-based fermentation. We think about traditional fermentations of sugars with yeast to make alcohol. But a lot of people using ethanol in their supply chains, for example, Coty, leading a fragrance manufacturer who we work with, they want to move away from land-based inputs because of the impact on biodiversity, for one. And so they are using ethanol sourced from recycled emissions in their fragrance lines. And so these are just like a few of the products that we can make based from ethanol. But what's really cool is that we can make more than ethanol, because we have this really clever little organism that essentially eats carbon. It can be asked to make other things. So today it makes ethanol. And through the power of biology, we can say, hey, can you make this chemical? And you can pretty much take that plant that's today making ethanol, and within a matter of days, you can be making another chemical. And so this really turns the chemical industry on its head, because today you have to predict 5 years down the line what chemicals you're going to make, because you have to build a whole plant dedicated to that chemical. But with this carbon transformation process, you can have one plant taking steel mill emissions, for example, and you have this biological organism that today makes ethanol, but next week makes isopropyl alcohol or acetone. It just switches what it's making. And there you see the real value in transforming carbon.
Wow, that is amazing. It's crazy how much that plays into our everyday life and the things we use.
I mean, you don't want to think about like chewing gum or toothpaste, but it's in everything, fossil carbon's everywhere.
Well, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I mean, I think I would probably just say, we need all solutions. This carbon problem's bigger than us. And, there's room for everyone to help bend that carbon curve. But I think we really want people to think about where their carbon comes from. For us, it's all about how we procure, use, and dispose of carbon. And that's really going to determine our climate future and determine whether we have a healthy planet or one that's pretty bleak. And I, for one, I'm so excited to be part of an industry that, is leading the way in these amazing technologies that can turn, what is essentially a liability into such a great opportunity.
Well said. Again, we are joined today by Freya Burton, Chief Sustainability Officer at Lanzatech. Thank you again, Freya, for joining us on today's podcast.
No, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Yes. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you or your company is interested in recording a podcast, please contact Carbon Capture Magazine. Otherwise, we hope to see many of you at the National Carbon Capture Conference in Des Moines next month. And until next time, thank you.